Good afternoon. Thanks for coming. I think there's not much to be added to Anders Arak, but he mentioned sausages in the shops, and this reminds me that I began in 1970s with a vegetarian diet. That time, I turned out to be very lucky because thousands of people were angry. They were queuing before the shops, waiting for deliveries of meat, and I could walk past indifferently. My happiness was not related to the sausage or any other kind of meat. And I'm convinced that this is one way to happiness. But anyway, we have to deal with crisis first. And it looks like a crisis has not been overcome. It's a chronic one. And one message from the last 5 years has been that there's no free lunches. You have to pay back your debts, and that's a problem. This requires a principal change of our attitudes, our models of living and thinking, because for several decades, people just thought that it's too big to fail, and there'll be steady, constant progress toward more production, toward more wealth, and so we can afford to ourselves taking more loans and living today, consuming today what we should have consumed tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. I happened to listen to one of the speeches by Otto von Habsburg, who left just lately. He was member of the European Parliament too, elected from Germany. And he reminded that in mid-1980s, he wrote an article where he warned that whereas his generation was used to live consuming as much as they earned and putting something aside for the not so very lucky days, the current generation, and that was a generation of 1980s, has become used to take loans and consuming today what they should have consumed tomorrow after they have earned sufficient money. That means they had started to live at the expense of their children. And what struck me was that nobody took heed of these warnings in mid-1980s. And now, about 30 years later, we have to face a situation that we have been accustomed to live at the expense of our grandchildren, not just our children. They have to take responsibility for our behavior, our debts, and the really dramatic problem is that the number of our grandchildren is diminishing. We don't have people who take responsibility for our deeds, our decisions, and this is also part of our decisions. Many people have decided not to have children because they are a nuisance, they're an obstacle to have more consumption, to have more fun, to travel more. And we can't escape now anymore this situation. So one conclusion is very obvious. The previous model of, I would say, consumption and fun is not sustainable. We have to change it. And of course, there's also a problem of the quality of consumption. Is this the main objective of our lives? I've been intrigued sometimes about the, I would say, dictatorship of growth. Growth at any cost. We need growth, whatever we consume. When this would stimulate growth, it's okay. I think we have reached a stage that we should concentrate on the quality of growth and, of course, quality of consumption also. Because we, even in Estonia, we look around and we find people who are drowning in things. They have bought, they don't know very well what to do with these things. But we see this in case of our children, our not so many numerous children, that they are so overburdened with toys that this leaves almost nothing for them to develop their fantasy. All is prescribed, all the models have been invented by older people, but they are supposed just to consume them. So instead of Homo sapiens, we have to accommodate to the Homo consumens, consumption and entertainment. And by the way, politics too has partially become part of the entertainment industry. Politics should have something to do with fun, with entertainment. Otherwise, you would not vote for these people. There's one dilemma for several years in Europe, discussed also in the European Parliament, that's austerity versus growth. And the European Parliament has been divided half and half. Some declare that you need austerity first, you need to cut your expenses, balance your budget, and then you can resume growth. And the others say that enough of austerity, because you see, I just met last week a young Greek member of the European Parliament, who was a very nice guy, but who said that, yes, we have now endured this process for more than 4 years, and there's no growth. We cut, and troikas pay their visits to Greece, but we can't go on this way, because there's no growth. We just have to obey the dictatorship of the European Commission and IMF and European Central Bank. And obviously you need some flexibility in such situations. But I think our southern neighbor, my former colleague, Valdas Dombrovskis, has shown a very important example. Also Estonia has shown it, that you can combine both, and you need both. Both austerity at certain moments, and then based on austerity you can resume growth. It is possible, it is doable, and I think this is a very important message to our southern European neighbors, who just, many of them have used to conclude that we can't cut anymore, otherwise we're going to die. People in the Baltic states have demonstrated that we have cut much more and we are alive, and we have restored growth. But nothing is of course guaranteed. However, in the years of crisis, many leading politicians have said unofficially that in general we know what to do. We know very well. The thing we don't know is how, after we have done all this, we could be re-elected. What we have to do is, of course, first very, very simple and basic thing to complete the single market. It was a sour discovery for the new members of the European Union that the single market upon which the European idea is based has not been completed, that there are hundreds of exceptions and barricades which obstacle the really free flow of goods, of not so much capital, but labor force and specialist services. And we have still not managed to agree upon opening up the services market. Now there's a digital single market. Estonia has advanced this idea, but this too has become a common terminology, still without much practical results. Second, structural reforms. It is so simple. Now crisis has exposed that France will need structural reforms, not to speak of Italy or Spain or Portugal, and of course not to speak of Greece. But still, it is extremely difficult to conduct these reforms, partially too because of the popular resistance. Thus, it's so difficult to do serious reforms, and usually they will stop, at least for a time being, on halfway. They have started, then there's fierce popular resistance, and you have just to accommodate, you can't finish them very well. Then innovation, which is related to competitiveness, once again a basic dilemma and basic disease of the European Union. There are very few countries which could boast with competitiveness and productivity. And it's still the complex of normal European leaders versus America. Even regarding the problems America has, still it's obvious that there's much more productivity, innovation in America than in Europe. And the failure of the infamous Lisbon strategy, which was proclaimed in the mid of last decade to make European Union the most innovative, the most competitive entity in the world, has failed. This has been officially recognized. I remember when I first knew about it, this 7 years of Lisbon strategy reminded me of Khrushchev's 7-year plan, when he declared that in 7 years we become equal to America, then go ahead and finally will bury America. Now America is still there and still to be envied. Nothing has changed so much. And finally, one very potential tool to advance growth, once again, which we have neglected to use, is opening up and agreeing upon transatlantic free trade and investment market. Negotiations have started, but just now, only this summer, and one high official from the European Commission 2 weeks ago said that 2 years earlier we looked at these possibilities as something of fantasy. It was regarded not to be possible. And here I must praise the European Parliament because for the last 5 years, European Parliament has adopted 3 or 4 resolutions about transatlantic cooperation, free trade area. And this is a normal development, of course. Otherwise, the huge free trade entity, European Union, would be limited to itself. It is only normal to open up to Northern America, where they have NAFTA, which too has not brought promised results. One American senator during a meeting made a remark that don't mention NAFTA, because this means mentioning a failure. It is not working, we are not satisfied with it, but even this brings more justification for seriously addressing the problem of transatlantic free trade and investment market, which could, if all goes well, add at least 1% of GDP growth for both sides, and which has brought a very, very important knowledge we are not aware of, how much interdependent the both blocs have become, because we are not aware of, we are aware of American investments to Europe, but Americans are not aware of Europe's investments to America, that in some American states, European investments are producing, creating tens of thousands of jobs and making possible very important percentage of local growth. But this is so. We are a bit worried that all these scandals about NSA and bugging have inspired several political groups to demand to stop even free trade negotiations. But I think it's not serious. We need to proceed, and this is an important reserve. We have in Europe become too much dependent on European resources, of course. And now, during the crisis, it's the right time to look for our own resources and possibilities. These are huge. European Union is the mightiest economic power in the world. However, it sometimes looks like Polish state, I beg your pardon, from Polish ambassador, but the infamous Polish state where every member of nobility had a veto power. And this ended in a tragic way. In the European Union too, we have retained veto powers. This is good, but this is also bad. I am quite conscious that small states need guarantees to say no if the big ones would overpower them. At the same time, it's obvious that if we are heading for more efficiency and coordination and trying to avoid future financial crises, we need to have more harmonization and more unified mechanisms. But these are the possibilities which are at hand, which have practical value. How to come out of the crisis, structural reforms, completing single market with the addition of digital single market, to lay stress on innovation, that is financing and helping research and development. It was not by chance that the European Parliament made this one of the crucial points, agreeing compromise with the Council, to provide money for research and innovation. And finally, to complete the transatlantic free trade area. As I mentioned, this means that the previous model is not sustainable. And this brings us back to the values, which is the title of our conference, because one of the most repeated conclusions, at least on a theoretical level, is that the financial crisis is rooted in moral crisis. It is rooted in the crisis of values. If we can't return to the values, which of course includes solidarity, but solidarity is not the only value. The basic value is taking responsibility for your actions. Being responsible, this value has been neglected very much, and it has caused an extensive damage. And then taking the interests of the European Union as a whole seriously. We are still in practical terms obstacled by the fact that almost every member state is concentrating on its national interests. And it has to be very, very serious crisis when we are ready to overcome our national interests, but they are still there. We need to realize this situation better. And of course, there's just one example, controlling the European banks, which starts next year. There will be supervision of 128 biggest banks. Our German colleagues are not very much interested that the regional banks would fall under this control. And it has been said that whereas German government has been tougher, on Greek banks than on German banks who have lavishly loaned money to Greek citizens. So once again, we see how big and serious practical obstacles there are. But after all, we have to realize that money is not automatically leading to happiness. Money is needed, wealth is needed, but we can't overcome the crisis and prevent the next one to reach us when we don't change our attitudes. And this is a challenge to European citizens, entrepreneurs, of course, politicians, scientists, churches, who have lost their role, the role which church has in Polish Solidarność revival. But all this is needed if we want to address the crisis efficiently and, I would say, in an innovative way. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tunne, for your far-reaching ideas, which have offered us ample of food for thought. And I think we have some time for a few questions. So who would like to put a question? Yes, please.
Pardon.
Just a moment, a microphone.
Thank you. I'm a Polish ambassador, but please don't quote me as a Polish ambassador. I will speak on behalf of myself in order to be more free to say a few remarks. When we discuss about the crisis in Europe, what strikes me is that we very often discuss, like the title of this very timely and very good seminar is about the managing economic crisis. And actually coming back to conservative values, what worries me in today's world is very often We don't talk about overcoming or preventing crises, economic, political, military. We more and more often talk about managing crisis. My main question is, do we live in a world where political class, in principle, cannot overcome the crisis? So we have to live in a constant crisis. Maybe that's a concept of humanity. I'm not quite sure if that reflects 2,000 years of Christian history in Europe. So that would be a general question, but allow me to say two brief remarks. When we talk about the reasons of the crisis in Europe, you mentioned free lunches. Maybe I'm not economist, I'm just a diplomat, and maybe I'm oversimplifying, but I would summarize the reasons of the economic crisis or the financial crisis in Europe in more or less this kind of anecdote. So the person comes to the restaurant and orders the lunch, and without finishing this lunch, it orders 5 others, saying that he will pay after he eats this first lunch. And in the meantime, he is taking 20 other lunches, saying that he will pay them back after he will finish the first 6. That's more or less how the bubble financial banking economy worked and what brought us to the crisis. Actually, some politicians or the governments, they saw that it works, so they started doing the same on the state level, borrowing the money without really worrying how they will pay back for the lunch. Why Poland was a green island during the economic crisis? Because we were the only EU country that didn't face the recession. We were always on the DGP, we always had the GDP growth, and actually even now, although many were envisaging that we'll go down after this good time, we are right now the 5th fastest growing economy in Europe. The reasons were very easy. After the experience of communism, after experience of terrible recession, after experience of the socialist managed economy, we introduced in our constitution a 60% GDP limit for the national debt. That's why we constitutionally, since 97, we couldn't have higher debt than 60%, and actually there is a procedure that we cannot have it higher than 50%, because when it reaches 50%, the government has to take certain steps to make sure that the constitutional limit will not be grown. So long before the crisis, we had this security measure. Another one, and that was something that we were very criticized before the crisis, we had quite a stringent rules on the activity of the banks. Banks in Poland were complaining that they are not as free as they should be with their activities. When the crisis came, it came up that actually Western banks' branches in Poland, they were doing well, because they were not allowed to do many things that brought their headquarters very often to the collapse. The thing is that today we are all paying for unpaid debts of a few, and that is what is causing crisis. Of course, the Keynesian ups and downs, the cycles, that all works, but I think that the reasons of this current crisis are a little bit more simple, or I'm, as not being economist, I'm a little bit oversimplifying. And to what you've said at the end, the solidarity is very much an important direction in which we should be heading. In Poland, we have a saying, a Kali philosophy or mentality. Well, there was a book for children where there was a certain Kali who was saying, your cow is my cow, and my cow is definitely not your cow. And in Europe, not only in Europe, but we are talking about Europe, we very often face this kind of philosophy. So free market is free whenever it suits me. If it doesn't suit me 100%, it's not that free anymore. So that's definitely a prescription of solving many issues in Poland, in Europe today, and I think in a broader sense as well. Thank you very much.
Dziękuję bardzo.
Aitäh.
And this is a very good occasion to think if you would be prepared to be a speaker on our next conference. But I fully agree. I think there's not much to be answered. but it's once more a confirmation that you can't have free lunches. Otherwise, there'll be avalanche of debts. And what you started was management. We are concentrating on management. I think this is one of the problems of modern society, just to manage things, keeping them under control, or reacting to new problems. And I've sometimes thought that it is like building a new Tower of Babel. Just one construction on the other, reacting to this crisis with these new constructions or institutions, but it's going higher and higher, and we have the problem that in old times God just confused their languages. But now we have a core of interpreters who overcome these problems for managers. And we clearly need a statesman-like approach, because politicians are looking until the next elections. Statesmen look much more to the future. And at this point, we have to diminish the managerial impact and increase the role of statesmen. But looking around in Europe, where are these statesmen? This is also a challenge.
Thank you very much, Tunne, for your response, and thank you for your contribution.